All right. Well, good morning and welcome to the March 2019 meeting of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our February 14th meeting. I'll move their approval. Is there a second? Second, thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions?
I abstain.
That's right. Thank you. Motion carries. So this is the first meeting we've held since the public advocate special election was decided on February 26th. And this was the first election in which the 8-to-1 matching funds ratio was available to qualifying candidates, which helped change private fundraising patterns and sparked an increase in small dollar fundraising. Fully 75% of contributions raised came from New York City residents, and the most common contribution amount was $10, compared to $100 in previous public advocate elections. In total, the board paid more than $7.1 million to 11 candidates. That is the highest number of candidates to receive public funding in a citywide race in the program's history. And those public funds helped create a broad, competitive field that reflected New York City's diversity and gave voters a real choice at the polls. According to campaign finance filings submitted to the board, these public matching funds payments accounted for more than 73% of the funds available to candidates on the ballot. This is a higher percentage than any previous citywide race dating back to 2001. These are all good signs pointing towards the success of the increased matching funds ratio in New York City's campaign finance program. Those changes were designed to make matching funds available to more candidates for citywide offices and to make more funds available to those who qualify. Those changes were adopted at the polls in November 2018 by a very impressive 80% of voters. Later in February, I had the opportunity to speak before the 2019 Charter Revision Commission to provide expert insight on New York City's program and explain why similar programs based on ours have been implemented in cities and states around the country. Looking ahead, the CFB is getting ready for yet another election cycle. There will be a primary election in June and general election in November to elect a public advocate to serve out the rest of the current term ending in 2021. With that, I will turn to our Executive Director, Amy Loprest, for her report.
I have not much to report. I wish to congratulate Chair Schaefer on being reappointed to the board and for another 5-year term. So congratulations. We're happy about that. So while the 9% of people who turned out in the special election for public advocate, it doesn't sound like that much. It's about 400,000 New Yorkers across the ballot. It is notable because it was a one-off special election called just 2 months before. It was held in the dead of winter. It's for an office that many New Yorkers know little or nothing about. So I think that turnout figure actually was a surprise to many observers. And I would like to say that our NYC Votes campaign played a significant role in educating voters about that office and informing the public about the candidates running for that office. We published an online and video voter guide, including profiles for each candidate on the ballot. We ran paid advertisements on social media and streaming services to promote that guide. We engaged with voters on social media, answering questions, sharing information. We organized 2 televised debates between the candidates candidates who had demonstrated support, and our volunteers helped call nearly 2,000 voters in the days before the election. Again, as the chair mentioned, we'll do it all over again twice. There is an upcoming special election to fill the soon-to-be vacant 45th City Council District seat in Brooklyn, and in June there will be primary elections for the public advocate, the Queens District Attorney, and for Council District 45. So Please continue to follow us at NYC Votes on social media and sign up for our election alerts to stay informed about every election. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is our periodic announcement of campaigns in compliance. These are city council races from 2017. The following candidates from the 2017 elections have completed the post-election audit process without any violations and penalties assessed by the Campaign Finance Board. The board recognizes the diligence of the candidates and their campaign staff in running campaigns that maintained compliance with New York City's campaign finance laws. And those candidates are Vincenzo Chirico, Ruben Diaz Sr., Vanessa L. Gibson, Robert F. Holden, Ivan D. Mossop, and Nancy Tong. Congratulations to them. We have two appearances this morning by candidates contesting certain findings and proposed penalties and or repayments by the staff of the board, and we'll take them in the following order. First, Barry Grodenchik. Please have a seat at the table with your representative or counsel, and the attorneys and or auditor from the CFB staff take your seats to the table at my left. The way, since you've probably not been through this before, and we have, the staff of the CFB will give an exceedingly brief description of what the issues are before us, and then I will turn to you for whatever presentation or comments you wish to make. There may be a little bit of back and forth on particular points. And then and or questions from members of the board, and then when we're finished with both candidate appearances, we'll go into executive session or into deliberations rather, and then we'll come back and report on our decision. So why don't you guys begin?
Sure. Good morning, Chair Schaefer, members of the board, Executive Director Loprest, Council Member Grodenchik, and Mr. Bihar. My name is Joseph Gallagher. I'm Associate Counsel here at the CFB, and I have with me today Sonia Simoes, an auditor for the CFB. Before the board today is the matter of the Barry Grodenchik campaign in the 2015 primary and general election for City Council District 23 in Queens. The campaign was a participant in the program and received $188,996 in public funds. CFB staff recommends that the board find the campaign committed the following 7 violations of the Act and board rules: failing to provide bank and merchant account statements, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts reporting and documentation requirements, failing to demonstrate compliance with subcontractor reporting and documentation requirements, accepting contributions from unregistered political committees, failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign, making impermissible post-election expenditures, and failing to respond to the initial documentation request. The campaign contests 6 of these violations and penalties. CFB staff further recommends a public funds repayment obligation of $770.17, representing the campaign's final bank balance. The campaign does not contest the repayment obligation.
Thank you. Please introduce yourselves.
I'm Barry Grodenchik, was a candidate for council in 2015. The special election necessitated or run by the city upon the resignation of my predecessor, Mark Weapon.
And I'm Steve Bihar. I was a campaign manager, and I've been acting as counsel to the campaign.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, I guess we'll start by the numbers, the numbered of issues from the board's letter to us. The first one is the failure to provide bank and merchant account statements. We had given the staff all our bank accounts and all our merchant account statements. Unfortunately, unfortunately, we had statements from our Vantiv account, which was one of our processors for credit cards, and that those statements were online. And essentially what happened was the board asked us, obviously, in our first initial audit request, and then this following second audit request was a year later, and the merchant provider couldn't provide us with those account statements. And we repeatedly tried to contact them, and they were unable to find them. And I guess this is, part of the function of the staff of the audit process here that can take a year or 2 years before you're required to put information in. And sometimes that information is increasingly online. And when you contact your merchant account provider with your EIN number, your tax ID number, and your merchant account number a year or 18 months after an election is over, they no longer have that information.
I don't want to be argumentative, but as I understand it, not very technologically sophisticated. When it was available online, you could have printed it out, and at that point, you could have predicted that, or you could have known from the law that the staff was going to need that documentation.
You're correct, and we were told by our merchant provider that this was going to remain online, and it was what we relied on.
Could I just say that the first request for that documentation was made on March 11th, 2016. The general election was in November of 2016. So it was about 2015, sorry. So it was about 4 to 5 months that the first request for those statements was made. And we never received them.
And we'll talk about the timing at the back end of this.
Okay.
We're not going to bother with the second, which was the cash receipts, and accept the $82 fine. On the subcontractor form, which is number 3, we provided the subcontractor form when we were requested to give it. We frankly didn't realize that it was unsigned until we got the fine letter. And so again, it was handed in by our contractor. Apparently our contractor didn't sign it. We didn't realize it until we got fined for it.
And one other aspect of that violation is that the subcontracted amount of $8,600 was never reported to public disclosure. So it's a substantial amount of money that the public, is hopes to have that available to them. So that's another aspect of that violation, not just the unsigned form.
Right, but we never got a bill from that subcontractor. Basically, we got a bill. We had done some mailings through a provider of mail that has been in business for a decade and a half. We helped design the mail pieces. The mail pieces went out. We got a bill and we paid them. It wasn't until after we had the request for the subcontractor form that we knew that, who they knew. When it's one thing I've dealt with the staff. I think that you kind of have to understand how campaigns work. And when you're running a campaign and you have a consultant that does your mail, you design your mail, you get the mail out, and you get a bill and you pay it. And I don't ask, who did the postage, who did the printing, I just get a $20,000 bill for 2 pieces of mail or wherever it may be. And it wasn't until this subcontractor form that was handed in that we had an idea that they even used subcontractors. So, and again, the form was in, the subcontractor didn't sign it. We didn't notice that. And then the next thing we knew, we got a fine for it. Okay, the next one is interesting. Accepting contributions from unregistered political committees. we had gotten our first couple of contributions from political action committees, and we understood that they had to be registered. So we called our liaison, and we were told, I specifically asked the question, how do I check if they're registered? The response was, it's on our website. The list is on our website. So what did I do? I went to the website, and in the website, there's a little search bar to search the website. I searched political action committees. What comes up? The list of registered political action committees. We checked to see if those committees were registered, and they were. And we didn't think anything of it. Maybe a few weeks later, we get a letter stating that these are unregistered and not registered political action committees, which made no sense to us, obviously. I again contacted our liaison to figure out what happened. What happened was that we were 2015 special, so we were following the guidelines of the 2017 cycle. When you put in political action committees in the Campaign Finance Board's website, it gave you the registered committees from the 2013 cycles. And those two committees had been registered in the 2013 cycle. So we actually told our liaison about it, and our liaison thanked us for giving us that information and said she was going to tell your tech folks that this was happening to avoid it going in the future. Then, a year and a half later, we're being fined $475 for nothing that we did. We just followed your guidelines and followed your website.
Let me ask a question. One, is there any dispute that these committees were registered on the 2013 list? And is there any dispute that once they were notified, they made a timely repayment?
They were repaid, the contributions. In Exhibit 5, if you see, is a screenshot of the website where it shows that you toggle between election cycles, and then it gives a date range for when.
I understand, but if you looked at, is there any dispute that the 2013 list, if that showed up, that these committees would have been shown as registered?
One of the contributions was not on either the 2013 or the 2015. One of the committees.
Was that?
Let me check one sec.
Mm-hmm.
The Hevesy for Assembly was not on 2013 or 2017. 2013 or 2017.
We did return them, though.
They were returned.
You said toggle.
I'm not a toggler.
Did you see the toggle when you went on? I'm not sure. I mean, do both sides appear automatically, or do you have to push a button?
There's no toggle. What happens is if you put in political action. I'm assuming they fixed the problem, but if you put in political action committees, it just brought up a list.
There is a screenshot at Exhibit 5, and you can see it says the date range for when the political committees are registered, what date range that applies to, and then it has the toggle for 2017, 2013 for each election cycle. And
that's a screenshot. That's a screenshot of what existed before it was fixed.
As far as I know.
Well, the fix is it's the search. So when you search, it comes up to the most. Went to the 2013 election, which was the most recent election, but this always showed. So it always showed that you can. There are multiple election cycles. You could always scroll between the different election cycles, and there's a date range that applies to.
So if you had read it really carefully, you would have noticed that it was 2013, not 2017.
Again, it just came up with political action committees, and we just, and then we did.
Indicated that it was the 2013 list.
We were quite surprised. I mean, I was immersed in the campaign, of course, but we were quite surprised that that this would happen. I understand that, communications between individuals is not always as crisp as it could be, but there was certainly never an intention of the campaign to, in any way, shape, or form, try to go around what the registered political action committee.
We understand that and accept that completely. What we're really talking about here is clearly at worst an oversight or negligence that you didn't notice. It was what you were looking at was the 2013 list.
We just, to be frank, we just did what we were told to do. They said, find it on our website, and we searched, and it came up, and lo and behold, the names were there, and we moved on. I mean, you're in a campaign. I mean, we shouldn't be having to, go through a Where's Waldo program here and try to find somebody that's deep, in a picture somewhere. We put political action committee. We searched. The list came up. Boom, 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 and we moved on.
Okay, we got the point.
Thank you.
Okay, moving to number 5. This is the failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign. And it's a $1,512 fine. This is particularly perplexing to us. There's really 3 facets of this. And I'm not sure if the staff have worked on campaigns before, but this has left us scratching our heads. We had canvassers going out through this campaign from, early in June, getting petitioning and then canvassing. We had people working on the campaign over what the last weekend of the campaign, of course, is what we call the Get Out the Voter GOTV weekend, and then we had people working on Election Day. Those people tended to be mostly young people, mostly college or some high school students, and when they handed in their timesheets, they got paid. So the people who worked the last weekend of the campaign and worked on Election Day, some of them gave us their timesheets a week or so later, or 5 or 6 days later. So once they got their timesheets in, they were paid. You'll see there's dates paid. I forgot what the election day was. Maybe it was November 6th. There were people who were paid on November 9th and 8th and 10th. Apparently, the staff is trying to state that we were paying canvassers to go out and canvass after the election was won, which makes no sense to us.
Mr. Gallagher can speak for himself, but that's not my understanding of the issue here. My understanding of the issue is the lack of a contract or other similar document that would explain the increase in compensation.
No, we're just talking about I haven't gotten that yet.
This is the next violation.
This is the
impermissible post.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on the wrong one.
No, it's.
I'm sorry. I probably mixed up the two. Yeah, this.
This is number
6.
You're on number 6.
I went to number 6 by mistake. I'm sorry. I said number 5.
I listened to what you were saying, but I was looking
okay, go
at
back.
the other.
I'm sorry. I'll go back to 5. But number 6, yeah.
Stay with 6.
These were canvassers that were knocking on people's doors, giving them literature, reminding them to go out and vote. The idea that we were paying people to do that after the election is ludicrous.
And we would have gladly accepted those timesheets. They were just never provided.
Yeah, we actually were trying to find those, and when we couldn't. But the idea that these were the only timesheets that were asked for, and the idea that canvassers aren't considered election expenditures, again, seems ludicrous to us. They were input into both C-SMART and to the state board as canvassers. It seems like they were paid within days of the election. We don't even know why this was an issue brought up.
I think the issue is documentation, and I think the documentation was requested. And if you can't find it, I believe, please correct me, that you're allowed to recreate it with a note that these are recreated timesheets based on best recollection and other records we can put together. So it's just a question of documentation.
Well,
is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, there's just they were reported as being paid post-election, which is why they were cited as impermissible post-election expenditures. The reporting was changed to pre-election when it was brought to their attention, and we asked for backup documentation just to make sure that all of these campaign canvassers had timesheets for the pre-election period, and we just never received those.
We were never asked, we were never given the opportunity to, quote unquote, recreate these documents. We were told to give an explanation, which we did.
Let me ask a question. In terms of this penalty, it also includes other payments. How much of the penalty is for these canvassers, and how much of it is for these additional payments to the three people listed?
One moment.
I'm not sure the memo makes a distinction.
So if you see Exhibit 7, almost the entire first page of Exhibit 7 is for wages.
Number 6, 969 is the total penalty.
Right. So then in Exhibit 7 to that, so it's towards the end of the board memo. I just have to do some quick math to take out the canvassers.
We didn't pay anybody after the campaign.
No, of course not.
In theory, you could have people working after a campaign to shut down an office. I think Steve and I just
which will be number 5.
Took everything and brought it up the hill to my house and put it in the garage.
I mean, I have to confess, looking at this doesn't answer my question.
I'm doing some quick math.
Just a list of numbers.
Well, the penalty is 900.
Yeah, but the penalty notice says it's for canvassers, stop, and then it's for additional payments to 3 people for cleaning and closing the campaign office.
Those 3 people included me.
Yes,
and essentially they were, one thing about campaigns is whether you win or lose, the next day is lonely because everybody goes home. What happened was we had rented an office in the district. We had borrowed computers and a couple of printers and furniture and dozens of chairs from the councilman, from my girlfriend who lives in Suffolk County.
I know for the record, those chairs are still in my garage.
So, and the day after an election, the office is a mess. So it took us, and frankly, it's in our district, and our landlords are constituents. So we wanted to make sure.
Right around your district, so it's okay.
Yes. It was right on Hillside Avenue, close to the Nassau County border. It was a little storefront. No, that's the other one. I'm sorry. This was the second election. This was in Queens Village. So we wanted to make sure that the office was closed and clean. So it took us about 3 days. There was empty pizza boxes and cans of soda and paper. And like I said, there was a conference room and chairs. There was furniture. There was computers. So it took us a few days to break down the office, clean it, leave it spick and span, and deliver the stuff that had been, loaned to us. My girlfriend's lawn chairs, and chairs that they use on picnics and things like that. So that's what that was, and they were the 3 days after the election. Again, I don't know what the staff thinks happens after an election.
No, I think there's a recognition that there needs to be post-election expenditures, but there's a particular sensitivity to the documentation requirements because any use of public funds, particularly post-election, I guess there's a sensitivity and a concern that there being spent for an inappropriate use.
Right, we understand.
So it's just documentation. I mean, what are some of the documents that would have been helpful?
Well, for Mr. Bihar, Mr. Awashti, and Mr. Young, who were all paid post-election payments, there was just no contract for any of them saying that they were contracted to complete post-election duties. So the payments weren't. So we would have taken
what would have sufficed as a
timesheet showing the duties that were performed post-election, a amended contract or a contract that was created at the time, showing that they were being contracted to perform post-election duties. And we received no timesheets and no documentation showing what they did in that time period.
And a sentence or two would have been adequate.
We gave them the sentence or two. And that's the whole point. And you're talking about people canvassers making $11, $12 an hour. And I think we paid myself and Dev, who was our field director, and Spencer Nelson, who was our field organizer. I think we paid us $16, $17 an hour. And we gave them exactly what we were doing. And we told them how much we were paid. And we thought this was over. I mean, it seemed to us completely logical. And it wasn't even, you're not even talking about, a ton of money. You're talking about 2 or 3 days work at $16, $17 an hour. And you're talking about canvassers that worked on election day.
Let me ask another question in this category. GoDaddy and Nation Builder, what are those used?
Those are our website and our document retention, because we were trying to keep as much documents. To be frank, we've had issues with the staff before on documentation, so we were trying to keep everything we could online. So the GoDaddy account and the Nation Builder account was where we kept. If we closed them down, we would have lost all our emails and all the documents served on the emails. If we had closed down Nation Builder, we had documents on the Nation Builder that was saved. So this was just a way of retaining documents, and we're talking about. I think it was $15 a month or something to retain documents until we're done with the audit.
A question about the individuals, the canvassers and campaign staff.
Sure.
The people who got paid for either post-election work or got paid post-election for immediately pre-election work.
Yes.
Those people had already appeared as paid staff at a previous point
exactly,
in time.
yes.
So they weren't strangers to the campaign.
No, they were people. Some of them had been canvassers, I believe, since we were petitioning in June. I mean, this wasn't new people. These were just, and I guess somehow in the last few days, they were supposed to get their timesheets to Dev Awashti. We had no office. Dev was,
So these are people who had submitted timesheets at a prior point in time. And your argument is in the rush of the last days, we didn't get the timesheets.
No. We had asked them to give the timesheets. Obviously you have people working on election day or on that last weekend. So we said right after the election, please give us your timesheets. And some people gave it to us. Some people may have given us the night of the election. Some of them may give us the day after, 2 days, 3 days after the election. If you see the payments.
But some of them you couldn't find.
Some of them we couldn't find, and again, that's kind of post-election. They sent them to Dev via email, or did it on their phone and sent it to him, and then he sent it to me on my phone, and I paid them. Again, these weren't payments that went out from December, January, February. They were, election is say November 6th, and the payments were November 9th. It just seems logical.
Okay.
For future reference, the documentation requested can be created if necessary after the fact, with a note that it's being created based after
That's
the
right.
fact.
And there's nothing from the board, the staff, I should say, who requested us to recreate these documents. The board asked us for an explanation. I'm sorry, the staff asked us for an explanation, and we gave them an explanation. The staff didn't say, please recreate this. It said, give us an explanation. And
we also asked for documentation, which was not received. No timesheets were received. No amended contracts were received. We received an explanation. It wasn't sufficient.
Let's go to 5.
Back to 5.
Back to 5.
Back to the future.
Okay, what happened here, again, this was I was the campaign manager. Dev Awashti was our field director. and Spencer Nelson was our field organizer. It's this normal staffing of a campaign. We ran a very lean operation. We had more. We didn't pay the staff a lot of money, as you can see. Most of the money went for canvassing.
We ran a robust field operation, more than some people would have recommended, but we did cover the voters that we targeted at least 15 times. It was very intensive in that sense, and I think we spent a fair amount of money on it.
Right, and
I was happy about it.
And what happened here was that once the campaign won the primary, we extended the contracts of myself and Deva Vawasti and Spencer Nelson. What the staff is picking up here is simply that Dev was paid $2,000 a month through the primary. The primary was, from say May and through the primary in September. Once the primary was won, we had to keep the staff for the general election. Now, the general election is much more compact, concise. It's only 2 months. That, with the exception of petitioning, you're doing the same amount of work that you did over a 5-month period. The other thing was that I would say somewhere upwards of 90% of our canvassers and the staff that helped us just doing phone calls or working in the office were either high school students or college students. So after the primary, we lost the bulk of our staff. So we paid Deva Vawasti because he was going to be doing more work in a shorter period of time and covering for a lot of the other workers and volunteers that had left. We increased his salary from $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And somehow we're getting fined for that. And again, we had a contract extension, which was a single page, which we couldn't find, and we tried to explain it, and that's where we were left. We thought it was a logical explanation, and we. And again, he was paid, everybody, Deva Vawasti, I'll use him as an example. He was paid May through November, and he was paid for the first 4 months of the campaign. He was paid $2,000 a month. And then the last 2, which were, intense, concise period of time, he was paid $3,000.
Yeah, I don't think there's any objection to the substance. The objection, once again, is to documentation, some sort of support. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah, for Mr. Washi. And we did have a conversation with Mr. Bihar in response to the penalty notice about recreating contracts. It's in Exhibit 3, page 3 of 6. Mr. Bihar mentions it. The campaign is working to fulfill the requirements of CFB Rule. It's we were cited here 401E. Unfortunately, they're both currently in law school and unable to recreate the contracts. So they knew about that. Recreation of contracts was an option to them.
Yes.
We just never received a recreated contract. And for the first campaign worker cited, Mr. Nelson, we never received a contract for him for the primary election or for the general election when his salary was substantially increased.
When you say substantially increased, I thought I heard something different, that if you added up the amount of individual payments that he actually got in the primary, it was not really different than the $4,000 or so.
It was $2,000 to $3,000.
That's for Mr. Awashti, and I was speaking of Mr. Nelson, who is paid approximately $100 to $200 per week as a campaign worker in the primary, and then was paid $675 per week during the general election.
But he was Spencer Nelson was a canvasser throughout the primary, and he did a lot more work, obviously. So he did a lot more work in the general because, again, most of our volunteers and staff left. His $675, frankly, that we paid him was probably pretty close to what he was getting paid for canvassing.
We had $100 to $200 a week for the canvassing during the primary election.
So we're talking about a couple hundred, $200, $300.
And again, I completely sympathize with this role change, but the CFB did not receive a contract, wage records, or timesheets. So we're just, the good word of the campaign is what we're depending on. And I'm happy to take that in this case, but there's some cases where that's not going to be the situation. And we require the same documentation from every campaign.
I mean, are you? It seems like you're more in the business of finding people than to see if people have complied.
Because I don't want this to become too much of a back and forth between the two of you. You know, it's like the story about the rabbi, and you're both right. You know, the staff has to audit a whole lot of campaigns.
We appreciate that,
And
certainly.
in order to do that and to do it efficiently, they have to rely on documentation. And here is a situation where the rules permit you to recreate the documents after the fact, and that can be acceptable, and you fail to do so for whatever good or not good reasons. It didn't happen. You're now here in person presenting a case, and you're trying to make facts known to us which satisfy the substance, if not the reality of written documents behind the rules in question. So, you know, the staff was doing and is doing its job, and our rules require certain kinds of documentation. You're making your presentation based on the facts as you know them, and although you're not witnesses under oath, we're probably inclined to accept the truth of what you're telling us. So let's just go on with that understanding.
I understand, and as a former Securities and Exchange Commission attorney, I understand the process of documentation, and sometimes the documentation is missing, and trying to find the truth. And this is my whole point. And I guess what set me off a little bit was that we're trying to find the truth. That should be, I think, the most important thing here.
Okay.
Well, but that isn't the nature of these particular violations. It's not truth. It's just documentation.
That's right.
Anyway, so yes, let's move on. I think we understand. And part of this is for future reference. You know,
Yes.
keep in mind
Yes.
there are ways of addressing. You know, the more you interact with staff and say, you know, I'm sorry, we can't meet that exact request. Is there an alternative way to meet this documentation requirement? You know, you can have a dialogue and meet it. That way.
Right, but we were told during this whole process to give us an explanation. For most of what we're talking about, give us an explanation. And when, for example, give us an explanation why canvassers were paid on November 9th when the election was November 6th. So we gave the explanation that once we got the timesheet, we paid them, and they were paid in the day that they got their timesheet to us. So, frankly, we thought that was rational and understandable, and we thought we'd moved on from that.
Before we move on to the next, what do you contest that the GoDaddy and Nation Builder is a way to maintain documents?
Yes, we provide a grace period for all campaigns of 2 months after the election to close out all those accounts. We typically never see documentation provided from GoDaddy. It's just a web hosting service. And Nation Builder, I'm not sure if we get documentation, but we received zero documentation from the campaign that originated from either of those sites.
Well, again, we explained this before. From GoDaddy, you're not going to get here's an email from GoDaddy. You're going to say, we need to see document X, Y, and Z. That document X, Y, and Z is saved in our emails. I'm sure everybody on the board has tons of documents in their emails. If someone asks you for you, go find them. That's why we kept the GoDaddy account open. It was my email, steve@barrygrudenchik.com, was hosted through GoDaddy. If I shut the GoDaddy account down, my 6-7 months of emails were gone, including all the documents that were in those emails.
We're not asking them to shut the websites down, but to stop paying for the websites with public funds. Past 2 months past the election,
we weren't paying with public funds. As a matter of fact, I've been contributing post campaign. We've actually added money to the account just to pay that, and it wasn't coming from public funds.
Did you have different information about use of public funds?
Well, the final bank balance when we last received bank statements from the campaign was at $770. And in communications with Mr. Bihar since then, he said it's now been reduced to around $100. So I'm not sure if there's an increase of funds in the bank accounts where that. I haven't seen evidence of that.
There's been bank fees also that have been, cleared. Again, we've tried to. also, again, to retain, we've gone through audits before, to retain documents and statements. We've kept the bank account open, and that cost, I think it's $15 or $18 a month.
I take very seriously, my responsibility to the city in this regard. When I ran in 2001, I lost to Mr. Gennaro, who became the councilman in the 24th district. I received, kind of surprisingly, a check for about $65,000 from the Campaign Finance Board because I was still on the ballot as a Working Family Party candidate. I paid someone several $1,000s to shut the campaign down, and I returned probably 95% of that money to the city. I certainly wasn't going to run, and this is a big chunk of change. It was right after the tragedy of 9/11, and I could have run. I decided, of course, not to. I supported Mr. Gennaro. He was the Democratic candidate. I was a Democratic district leader at the time. I just want to make the point that whatever we have done here, and if there's something we've done wrong, we'll take responsibility for it. I'm an adult. I'm a council member. I get all that. But I also just want to interject a little of my own personal history here because we could have spent that money. We didn't want to. I did go through an audit at that time. I think the initial request was like $16,000. We agreed to about $700 something or $800, which I wrote a personal check for at that time. So we certainly, I just want to make that clear. It's my name at the top, and I take full responsibility.
We appreciate that. We occasionally get cases where there are issues of dishonesty or
I'm sure you do.
Or bad faith. Yes. This is clearly not one of those.
We had canvassers who were dishonest. We follow them around, and they're in the pizza place, and they tell us that they have a 100% hit rate when everybody else is coming back with a 12% hit rate.
Okay, but speaking of percentages, we've spent a large percentage of our time up to now on what's 25% of the penalty. So let's turn to the biggest item.
Let's turn on to the bigger one. Okay.
I'm going to be frank, and
this is a tough one.
I'm disgusted. I'm utterly disgusted that I even have to go through this right now. In 2016, my father, who was at the time was a 91-year-old World War II vet, and my mother, who was 87 years old at the time, were both sick, and they were both in Florida. And they were both in and out of two different hospitals. My father in University Hospital in Broward County, my mother in
Let me
Cleveland
try to
Clinic.
make this easy for you. We know the facts. We understand that they are sympathetic and compelling. And the only issue before us, again, is whether they were properly documented in response to requests.
Okay.
And so I really... I don't want you to have to re-experience, the trauma of that period.
Go ahead.
We know what happened. We know what you say. We accept what you say. Again, this is an issue of could it have been done?
The answer is no.
Sooner and in a more formal way, so that they would have been satisfied.
It's emotional for Mr. Bihar. Obviously, he lost his mother very suddenly. I was told that she was in the hospital, and I had information that she was doing okay. And then the next thing I heard, she had passed away. So you can imagine the trauma of losing your mom very suddenly. It's always traumatic, regardless of the circumstances. But this was particularly traumatic, and Steve and I have talked about this many times, obviously, over the last few years, because she was full of life. She had a spirit of life. And he really had to put everything aside to deal with this, not only to deal with the funeral, which, that took some time, but not that much time, but really dealing with a father who was 91. He had made many, many trips to Florida back and forth. He's still going back and forth to Florida, even though his father's now living here in New York State. I'm in an assisted living facility. And that's a lot of work. So anybody who's had an old parent who's, and we all get to that point, hopefully, where our parents go before us, but it's traumatic. And so while we recognize a failure to file timely, I have to say it does bother me a great deal that a penalty of $10,000 is being assessed here. We're willing to pay a fine, of course, and we will ultimately yield to the judgment of this board because that's what we'll do. but it just seems to be way out of character. Had we willfully ignored, repeated stuff, he was dealing with his parents for months and months, and there's no one else that could have done this. I couldn't have done it. There was really nobody else around to do that work. And maybe I'll think about it differently going forward to hire somebody outside my next campaign. But this is what we were left with. And we were left with many months of Steve running back and forth to Florida to deal with an ailing parent who ultimately he decided that the best thing for his father Seminole mule, but he's here now. And even that, you're dealing with the disposition of property in Florida. So he has tried, I believe, to make his best effort. There was never any intention upon the part of the campaign to drag this out, to do anything. We, of course, want this done as quickly as possible. And that really, and I'll let you speak, of course, but that really is where we are. And I just have to say that to me, as a public official or as a private person, it seems way out of character for, there was no intent here. We participated. We understand we may have made some mistakes along the way. We're willing to own up to those mistakes as the board sees fit, but this seems to be just way out of line.
Let me ask a question. I'm assuming that if these facts had been brought to the staff's attention at the time, a further extension would have been granted.
They actually were brought to the staff's attention in March of 2017.
No, but that's not my question. My question is, if they had been brought to the attention of the staff at the time in the summer of 2016, I'm assuming that would have been basis for an additional extension.
Yes, and it was in March of 2017, nearly a year after the original was due. They called and the staff said, yes, it's already been a year, but we're willing to give you another extension to March 23rd, 2017, and we never received a response.
Well, first, during the year of 2016, as the councilman said, I went to Florida probably every 2 or 3 weeks. Both my parents were in and out of 2 different hospitals. I had spoken to the staff, and I'm looking at the contact record from the 19th of July, and the contact is correct, but it's not fully contained. There's an omission there. When I spoke about getting an extension, I spoke about how I'm working full time for the councilman. I'm his counsel, and I've been doing this, and I'm the only one doing this. And again, it's not listed here, but I mentioned that my parents have been sick, and I've been back and forth to Florida, and I was told that I could extend the deadline, but I was told that I couldn't extend the deadline past the deadline. So in other words, I had to get a deadline in before that deadline hit.
In other words, you're saying you were told you could not get any additional extension?
I was told that I couldn't get an extension. In other words, if it was due on March 1st, I couldn't get an extension March 2nd.
You had to request the extension before the deadline.
Right. Now, if you look at the date here was July 19th. What happened was immediately after that, my father was back in the hospital and I went down to Florida. Then my mother got sick again and I was back in Florida. So I missed the deadline. And when I reached out, I was told I can't get an extension past the deadline. If you look at the timing of this, I had a contact with them on July 19th, 2016. I immediately had to go to Florida. The next contact record is August 9th, 2016. And in this one, it says, after a request from the audit unit, I called Stephen Bihar. I left a voicemail saying the campaign board was not in receipt of post-election audit response, and the Gudentia campaign was now considered missing. This was August 9th, 2016. Why is that important? this is my mother's death certificate. It was the day my mother died.
Sorry, that contact record is July 6th, 2016.
The August 19th is just the date it's typed
Okay,
into the computer.
but so we're talking about within the 19th. So you're talking about July 19th. My mother died a couple of weeks later, and I didn't submit the request because that was the time I needed to do the request. And clearly, if I had a choice of making the request or going down to Florida and taking care of my parents, it was an easy choice. In addition to that,
let me just stop you there because I just want to make sure I understand where we're going with this. Mr. Gallagher has indicated that there was an extension in consideration of the very compelling and sympathetic circumstances that you've described. That extension ran till March
23rd, 2017. I have the papers.
Yeah, 2017. And that the issue really is not hearing anything further after that, requesting an additional extension or providing further information. I mean, I'm trying to narrow.
well, what happened?
I don't think this is a case where there's a compelling reason and the staff ignored you. I think this is a case where there was a coming together of the two sides for some period of time. Extensions are granted. There was an understanding. This is not a cold heart. We know these people. These are not cold-hearted people. But at some point, the ball just sort of got dropped.
Well, I went.
And that's really all we're talking about.
What I'm trying to explain is that, again, in July, late July, as I thought my father was dying, and actually it was my mother who was dying, there was communications about getting an extension. There was a deadline of getting that extension. My father was sick and my mother died in that time period. In the letter, in our letter about the fines, it stated that the staff didn't hear from me from the end of July, until October 26th. The reason why the staff didn't hear from me from the end of July till October 26th was in that time, I was not only was I back and forth to Florida, but my mother passed away on August 9th. My mother was the caretaker of my dad. And when my mother passed away, there was nobody to take care of my ailing 91-year-old World War II veteran father. So I went to Florida. I stayed there with him for a week. I took him back to New York. We kept him here for 3 weeks. I had a funeral in New York. I had a memorial service in Florida. In addition, my father is a stubborn old man. He's a mule. And he didn't want to stay in New York. So I had to work with the VA to get him in aid for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week in his home in Florida, and to get his apartment handicapped accessible. And he moved back to Florida that first week in October. So once he was back there and he was settled, I contacted the staff. And what I was told at that point was, you missed this deadline. It's the first audit. I was told not to worry. They said, what happened here is you lost the first bite at the apple, and that you'll get a second audit request and you'll be able to take care of it then. And to be honest with you, I was fine with that. I thought that's where I was. Okay, I missed a round of audit responses, but my dad's okay, my mom's gone, and when I get the second one, we'll just take care of it then.
Well, but that's why I want to turn to this March 9th letter. I mean, I take it somebody got this letter. I don't know whether you've seen this before, but it says your response is now due March 23rd, 2017. That's the last line of that letter. And the response did not come in on March 23rd, 2017, and no further request for an
Well,
extension.
I'm confused because the memo doesn't even talk about any of this.
I'm sorry, we found that because the contact records, Mr. Bihar called regarding the 2017 campaign. So the contact record was registered under the 2017 campaign. And then we found when he was calling, he asked about an extension for the 2015 IDR response in March.
Again, I'm confused because this memo we have talks about stuff in the summer. When was the response received?
The IDR response?
Yes.
Never.
So can you just give the board, because now this is very unclear,
Yeah.
the date that because what happens, so to make it clear, to explain, is what Mr. Behar just said is correct. What happens is a document request is sent to campaigns. They get in the normal course, a response is given, a draft audit is sent, a response is given. If there's penalties to be assessed, a notice of penalties is sent, a response is given. But when a campaign does not respond to the initial document request, after a period of time, a draft audit is prepared without that response. It doesn't negate the fact that the campaign had failed to respond to it, but it does give you another opportunity to respond. So
Right.
why don't you, the dates that I think are relevant that are missing now that we have this letter is, when was the draft audit response sent? Because they got this extension to March 23rd, 2017 for the initial document request, which is what is the subject of the penalty and is the subject of the discussion about the previous summer. But when did we never received the initial document request and then a draft audit was sent. When was that draft audit sent?
After March 2017. So Mr. Bihar called when he was about the 2015 IDR. He was then called Joel Babb, who was an auditor at the time, and said, we never responded to our IDR. Can we get an extension? Probably talking about his extenuating circumstances. Joel Babb granted that because the DAR, the draft audit report, had not yet been drafted. Because when a campaign doesn't reply to the initial documentation request, at least in this election cycle, they then would be pushed back while we get the others with more pressing deadlines. So the draft audit report was never created. So Joel Babb, in his role as an auditor, said, yes, it would help us to have your IDR in order to draft your response, in order to draft the draft audit report. So he granted one more extension, which is not in the regular course of our processes. And that extension was granted and never responded to.
But Amy's question is, how long after March 23rd, 2017 was it until the draft audit report?
Oh, thanks. The draft audit report was sent in October of 2017, and it was due in November of 2017.
I assume from the fact that there are no recommended penalties related to anything else, that all the other responses were made timely or with extensions that were, there's no other.
That's
untimely.
right.
That's okay.
It was only during this time period where I was taking care of my parents.
I just wanted to clarify the process because I think it was the dates were getting.
And frankly, the year after my mother passed away, I was back I went to Florida even more. I was every 2-3 weeks to take my father to doctors and, to make sure he was okay. And ultimately, he only stayed in Florida for a year. He lost 14 pounds and became anemic, and we moved him back to New York. And he's in the hospital now because he fell on Monday. So, at the end of the day, we were working with them. We were trying to work with them. And it was unfortunate that I was the only one that was able to do this. I was a one-man show. And
Can I look? I want to make clear that the staff was responsive to these extenuating circumstances. I have no doubt they would have continued to be had somebody responded to this. And the lack of response to this, which then necessitated a draft audit report without any input from the campaign, is the kind of thing that we like to avoid.
I understand.
But it's also, not. We understand that it's not the worst thing in the world that can happen in the course of these audits, and we're prepared to think about that further take that into account.
Can, I just wanted to just also point out, and is that the staff recommended penalty is based on guidelines that are published ahead of time,
Yeah,
and so we understand. So I just wanted to point out that obviously, the board is going to take into account what you said today, but the staff's recommendations are based on published guidelines, and so
and there was
yes.
Everything that we've done through both our campaigns. And you know what? It's one thing you learn working on campaigns over years is that, it's tough to deal with stuff post-election because the election is crazy and then it's over. And then whether it's a year later or 6 months later or 2 years later, you're going back and trying to recreate things. Everything we've been tried to do has always been on the up and up. And, we realize that sometimes documentation's missing or you misfile something and there's a penalty. We just thought a $10,000 fine for what happened here was egregious. And especially the fact that, I was quote unquote missing, but I was missing over that 2-month period that my mother passed away and I was trying to take care of my dad.
I think we got it.
And the only thing I want to say is my first campaign that I worked on was in roughly your district in 1961 for Seymour Boyers.
He just passed away, Judge
Boyers.
Boyers.
I went around as a student in the sound truck, urging people to vote for him. And he won.
He won. Just passed away. He was quite a distinguished public servant.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been a long but very helpful conversation. Anything further from either side at this point?
I just want to say thank you for listening with obviously open ears and for the sensitivity that you've had. And I know this isn't my first time here. I'm usually on that side of the table now, but we thank you for your time and for your consideration and for the work that you do for the city of New York. It's very important. We've worked over the years. I've been a strong supporter of campaign financing. I will continue to be. My colleagues and I don't always agree on every detail of it, but that's okay. That's what democracy is all about. I also want to thank the auditors for their work. I know it's not easy dealing with many, many different candidates. So that's really all I have to say today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we have next Harold Tischler. In light of the length of the last presentation, we're going to take just a 5-minute recess. If anybody would like to step out, we'll resume at 11:30. It's all right. It's all right. Let's. This is the old guy's recess. He's describing what his campaign headquarters looks like the day after the election. And I'm thinking about what my dining room looks like the day after my Seder, my Passover Seder, where you've got all the chairs and all the tables and the stained tablecloths and the crumbs.
Well, I just remember, I think at the end of a multi-day negotiation that's been going on day and night, I remember looking back at the conference rooms and seeing.
So you were a college student?
I was a high school student.
High school student. What high school?
Martin Van Buren.
All right, let's resume with candidate Harold Tischler. Mr. Tischler, I think you were here before. The way we operate is the board's... No, I just mean a little bit earlier today. Yes, the board staff will just tee up the issues for us very briefly, and then we'll give you the floor. So please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Schaefer, Executive Director Lopress, members of the board, Mr. Tischler. My name is Jason Yee, Associate Counsel for the CFB, and with me is Senior Auditor Victoria Telt. Before the board is a matter of the Harold Tischler campaign in the 2017 elections for City Council District 44. Mr. Tischler was a non-participant in the program. CFB staff recommends that the board find that the campaign committed violations of the Campaign Finance Act and board rules as follows and assess penalties according to the penalty guidelines. Failing to report transactions and failing to demonstrate compliance with reporting requirements for receipts. The campaign contests the recommended violations and penalties.
Thank you. Mr. Tischler, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schaefer, I'm contesting it straight out, and I don't want to knock Mr. Yee, but I'm disappointed with them. You know, I work with many different government agencies, and I volunteer and help a lot of different people in this city. And when I ran for city council, this was a special election. So the whole thing was 2 or 3 months. And I have documentation on September 19th. October the 4th, emails to the Campaign Finance Board. January, that's 2017. January of 2018, January 15th, again, compliance to and audits done to the Campaign Finance Board. On January 16th, with Mr. Gil Chachkis, my campaign manager, I met Mr. Yee later on. My campaign finished 1 day later, after it was a special election in, I think, November. We closed the accounts, prepared our paperwork, gave everything in. I make triple copies of everything. Not only do I email, I hand deliver everything to the Campaign Finance Board. I even got angry with Mr. Yee when he notified me on November the 30th that they sent me a mailing a year later that I should comply again with the Campaign Finance Board. Not that there was anything missing, that they were missing paperwork, which I submitted to them many times. So then I said to him in an email, I never got your original mailing. He says, well, ask for an extension. I said, what extension? You never sent me the original mailing. So anyways, I sent him an email, and he granted me an extension. I explained to him that I had my first grandchild after 101 nephews and nieces, and 20 foster children, and I said I need a little bit more time. And I said, it's a year ago, the paperwork, it's put away, even though it's organized, hand-delivered, all put away, a small little thing. And I said, I will send it over to you. Again, I sent Mr. Yee an email personally after he writes me that he never received anything. I said, I sent you 3 emails. I've scanned the documents. Mr. Gil Chachkis, I'm sending you the statements, the bank statements. There's only 3 or 4 of them. It was a small campaign. Mr. Yee again replies, I'm writing you to inform you the extended deadline. I didn't get anything. I don't know what to do. I updated, I uploaded, I sent it. What I did was the next day was I took we actually went into our files. I took my entire staff. I took all the kids from the youth center that I volunteer, and I said, let's go rip the place apart. We found every original document, put it together in a nice organized package, hand-delivered it to the Campaign Finance. I asked for a receipt from the Campaign Finance, my original documents. Well, Mr. Tischler, we're not sure we can give it back to you. We can't give you a receipt. I even sent a piece of paper, and the documents might not be returned to you. I even asked Mr. Yee now that I want them back. I don't have a problem that maybe the Campaign Finance Board is disorganized or they lost my paperwork, but I was cooperative. I had given the paperwork. There was no missing funds. My audits were done. Emails were done by Mr. Gil Chachkis, again, on every disclosure statement on time. And by the way, my mother did pass away a couple of days with them, but I don't use that as an excuse. But not then, by election time when we were doing everything. But my point is that I was cooperative. They want to fine me, I'm not sure what, that I didn't give it in a timely manner. And then finally, and this is going on when he notified me again on November the 30th, a year later, gave me an extension in December, he finally got hand-delivered the documents February the 21st or the 19th when we got in touch with each other. Mr. Yee always got cooperations, got always returned phone calls, got emails from me. Sometimes we got busy. I mean, I just can't always talk to Mr. Yee. I do have a wife and children, and my wife is pretty busy making sure I come home at night. So I just want you to know that I did cooperate. I have no idea what he's telling me. The documents are not there. I do request all my original documents. They're a nice little order that we dropped off to you on the 21st, I think it was, that be returned to me so I can have it for the next time that you request it again. Again, members of the board, he requested compliance more than a year after the election was done, and they give you less than 30 days to go back to old files. I do scan them and email them, but again, we have other stuff to go on. Everybody has hundreds of documents that go through their lifetime. Besides, I run a business and do other stuff. I have no idea what these fines are for, that I didn't comply. And at the end, after I did give them all the documents, I am in compliance. I did have everything. Nothing was missing. They're not saying I did anything wrong. I just didn't get them the documents fast enough. Thank you very much.
To respond?
Yes, so I would like to clarify a few things for the record. First was the 2017 general election. In addition, so we issued the enforcement notice on November 8th of
what year?
Of 2018.
A year later?
Yes.
Okay.
The enforcement notice was issued, which is standard practice as per our protocol.
And we spoke that I did not get it, correct?
Excuse me.
I said I was told that I'm allowed to interact. Was I not, Mr. Davis?
We heard you.
I know.
It would be more useful to hear him and then come back to you.
I just want to make sure he gets, if he makes another mistake, that I correct him as he goes along.
You'll get a chance to correct.
On November 14th, the Candidates Guidance and Policy Unit reached out to Mr. Tischler and reminded him via email that his response to the enforcement notice was due on November 23rd. November 23rd passes, and we haven't heard from him. I call him on November 30th to inform him that the deadline has now passed. He said that he had never received the enforcement notice. So I confirmed that his address that we have on file is correct and advise him that he may request an extension. He does so. I grant the extension for December 31st. December 31st passes. I do not hear from him. I called him on January 8th. He said that he was in a meeting. He would call me back. I do not hear from him. And on January 16th, I email him to follow up on the call and inform him that the deadline has passed. He responded, informing us about his family emergency. And he stated that he has prepared everything and sent it out already. We did not receive anything in the interim. And on February 11th, I sent another email following up that the deadline had passed, that we haven't received anything, and that if we didn't receive a response, the allegations would go to the board and contested. I would also like to state for the record that in February, when we did receive documents long past the deadline, because one of the violations was a missing bank statement, and on the face of it, one of the documents provided was, in fact, that missing bank statement, we resolved that violation. The remaining violations are reporting violations, and the campaign is no longer able to amend that reporting.
That's the point I want to come back to you with, Mr. Tischler. Putting aside the back and forth that occurred after the campaign was over, the first of the violations is a failure to report during the campaign itself. In other words, you, as I understand it, you failed to file one of the required disclosure reports during the campaign. So it seems to me what happened after the campaign and the back and forth between you and the audit staff really isn't relevant to this particular one, which involves a failure to filed during the campaign.
Mr. Schaefer, you misunderstand. I understand, Mr. Schaefer, you misunderstand, as I told you previous. On October the 15th, on September the 19th, an email was sent out to campaign finance.
Please.
What?
What
2017. Year? We had disclosures, and October the 4th, Both disclosures went out by emails. I mean, my people were on the phone with them. Every time we had a question or we didn't know something, we called Zoe or the campaign finance email address. Let me see, where's that email address? I mean, we sent them emails. I have the email. I'm able to backtrack the email 2 years later. I am telling you that the emails were given to them. They're saying they were missing a bank statement. I even gave them copies of the original audits that we did, that we hand dropped off. After we do the disclosure agreements by email, I always hand dropped it off. When I gave him the original file in February of this year, everything that was back then was given to him again now because we made so many different copies. So I don't know what Mr. Yee is saying about 2017, but if they look at their emails, and I'll give you the email addresses where it went, on October the 4th and September the 19th, both disclosures went out to the campaign finance board from Mr. Gil Chachkis, my campaign manager.
Can I just clarify the process? So
that's the way they requested it. They didn't want original documents, but we tried to drop it off anyways. They wanted everything done by this email address by email only.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. The issue is this: not that you didn't file the disclosure statements, but that the disclosure statements did not include all of the transactions that should have been in them.
But they did, Ms. Lopez.
Well,
they did. I understand that you're saying that, but then again, when they re-requested it, again, January 15th and January 16th of 2018, we then sent another email to Zoe something, again, sending all the documentation that they requested. If you'd like, I'd read the email from you guys and us, if you want, on January 15th and January 16th of 2018.
So is it your position that the $12,767.85 in transactions that were reflected in your bank statements were also reflected and listed in the disclosure statements that you filed with the Campaign Finance Board prior to the election?
Prior to the election?
Right.
That's the issue.
Yes. Yes, that's the question.
Before the election, I didn't file anything.
That's what we're talking about.
There was no election.
Violation is,
before election day.
Yes.
Yeah, we filed, as I told you, disclosure agreements, disclosure statements on September the 19th.
That's not my question. My question is not whether you filed the disclosure statements.
All the paperwork was in there.
Did you list in those disclosure statements
every penny?
$12,767.85. Do we have the disclosure?
Yes,
statements?
they were in the bank statements. Copies of the bank statements, Mr. Davis, bank statements, copies of each check given, because we don't take cash payments. I think there was one, maybe some. I think there was an internet donation, but I'm not sure. Everything was done by check. They were given checks, copies of the checks, copies of the statements, copies. It wasn't a lot of donations. It was a small little campaign that was run to show the people of the community and give people it was just a special election, and everything was given to them. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 or 7 checks, 3 bank statements. And they were given in each disclosure agreement. And then again, a disclosure statement. And again, in January, again, they requested everything again. And again, everything was given to them on January 15th and January 16th by email, and hard copy dropped off.
So Mr. Davis's question relates to whether you entered that information into a disclosure statement.
Yes.
Can you comment on that, please?
I have the disclosure statements if you want me. I could reprint it.
I would like to clarify
that
the issue is not the disclosure statements themselves. It's about reporting those transactions on CSmart, which was not
we did.
Done.
Email, I have a copy of that as well.
They reported on the disclosure statements?
Not sure. That's what we've been dealing with from day one. And we call. My paperwork was perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. We called, we fixed it. Again, Mr. Yee, a year later, calls me up and asks me for paperwork. Everybody needs time. I'm going to ask you right now, Commissioner, board member, to please give me your gas bill from 2 years ago. I promise you're not going to find it for me. I promise you. I will find it for you, by the way.
So the paperwork for the disclosure statement, there's no paperwork submitted. It is all entered electronically.
Correct.
So my understanding is that, no, those transactions were not reported.
They were not entered into CSmart.
which
as
I
submitted.
September 19th, October
if
4th,
I understand your question
January
correctly.
15th, January 16th. And we dropped off hard copies of everything that was emailed and entered in. I mean, he even says I'm in compliance.
Were these hard copies delivered to you with the relevant information?
Yeah, so we did get, we received 2 large expendo files of documents. Most of them were bank statements. There were several stray receipts, a debit card. There was no, this was untimely delivered, so we did not go through the entire audit process again. However, on the face of it, because
when were they delivered?
February
After the
21st.
After the election.
February 21st, 2019.
No, but he only requested it in November the 30th, 2018, after the election, and I did report.
No, I understand that, but the question is whether during these were documents that the staff alleges were to have been entered on C-Smart, and they were not.
But they were
The
stamped.
question from my fellow board member was, well, if they weren't entered on C-Smart, did you at least receive the hard copy documents?
At the same time.
And the answer is no, they came a couple years later.
No, they were received. They were delivered after every audit and after every time documents were requested. We did drop off. And by the way, all the documents that he got have dates on it, have signatures on it. So they're not delivered February 21st or recreated February 21, 2019. Those documents were created, issued, printed. You can even look at the bank statements in October, in January of 2000, in September and October of 2017, in January of 2018. Those are not new documents that were created and submitted. Those were original documents created on the right time that was submitted to them. They're not documents that were redone.
But nobody's alleging that they were recreated. I understand the original documents. The question is,
disclosure statements that were created on the proper dates have dates on it as well, and signed and given over to him.
Can't somebody just look and see what was there?
I gave him a whole big file with original documents. Look at the emails. If you want, I'll forward the emails to you. I did it to him. And one of his emails that were returned to me that the file is too big. Supposedly he can't handle big files in his emails. And that's why I hand deliver that to him. And I write to them, and we're in cooperation, and we are corresponding. He's fining me $1,100 for, not that anything was wrong with my documents, just that it wasn't delivered on time. And they didn't even request it for a year later. I got you, Mr. Davis. But at the time, even if you want to be correct, they never requested anything from me back in 17 or beginning of 18.
It's a requirement of the law.
Got you. And I did require the law. I didn't break the law. They didn't even give me.
No, there are 2 violations here. One we've been talking about. The other is that if you look at your bank statements, it shows 13,000.
But he doesn't have a problem with the money, Vi, because everything was accounted for.
But it shows 16,000 for 545, but you only reported 13,280. What's the fight about that?
There was no fight about that. Everything was,
No, this violation says your bank statements showed that you received $16,545, but you reported only $13,280 in receipts. That's what the second violation is.
Go ahead, D.
So the second violation is what the campaign reported receiving on C-Smart versus what the auditors found when reviewing the documents that were submitted. So going through the bank statements,
right.
yes, exactly.
And when were the bank statements first submitted?
So we received all but one of the bank statements in response to the draft audit report. So that would be
A while ago.
Yeah, okay.
That would
But as
be
you can see, he did receive paperwork and statements
May
missing.
May 23rd of 2018.
Got it.
Yeah, but this second violation.
He's missing one bank statement.
No, that's not the violation.
The second violation.
The violation is that your bank records show that you
Correct.
received $16,545, but you reported to the Campaign Finance Board that you only received $13,280.
That is the violation. I mean,
It's a violation not to report
well,
receipts.
everything was reported. It could be, maybe when they ordered it or he checked it over, It could be that maybe some of it was checks written. Maybe we didn't receive, or we received different ones. He went through the audit.
The bank statements are the bank statements.
Right, the bank statements are monies that were deposited and money sent out. And then he received he was given all the receipts of every single dollar that was written, and there was no cash payments in this election. So every check, every bank statement, everything was corroborated for. I have no idea what his audit. He didn't break down what was missing and what check wasn't. The bank statement, the bank account was closed, I think, with $20 in it. It means every penny that came into the bank account went out. They're writing there's $3,000 missing. There was no money missing. Zero. Every check that came in, every penny went out by check. The bank statements show that.
So I would like to clarify again that the issue at hand is not about documentation of anything. We did receive a documentation and we resolved the bank statement violation.
Right.
The issue here is about reporting. The reporting was not accurately The reporting did not accurately reflect what was going on, the activities of the campaign.
In the bank statements.
Right. But at the end of the day, Mr.
Which
Davis,
we found out when we reviewed the bank statements.
Everything was complied with and everything did show where it matched. He's saying that at the time everything wasn't there when we were doing it.
Responsible for timely reporting information.
We did, Mr. Camp.
So even
Mr. Camp. We gave him the paperwork. They were missing one state. We did.
Providing statements and documentation is necessary but not sufficient. You have to enter this information in reports that can be searched by the public.
We did.
And by the CFP
C-Smart
staff.
on September the 19th, October the 4th.
Right, but those disclosure statements disclose expenditures of one amount, whereas the bank statement that ultimately was produced during the audit process show a higher amount of receipts. And therefore, what you disclosed during the campaign was an incorrect amount. The purpose of the law is so people can see what's going on during the campaign. And it seems to me there's no issue here, there's no dispute that what you reported was an incorrect number.
And we fixed it.
It can't fit. Once the election is over, you can't fix it.
No, Mr. Schaefer, it was not fixed. We did not report incorrectly. What he's saying was he didn't receive all the documentation.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm listening to.
Number two, and what he's saying is that what you reported on C-SPAN reflected 13,000. C-SPAN. Sorry. If only. On C-Smart reflected $13,000 in change in expenditures, whereas the bank state that ultimately got produced showed that during that period of time you had $16,000 and change.
And at the end of the day, Mr. Schaefer, we didn't make new statements or new reportings. We submitted the documentation to him because most likely he was missing a statement. That's
a separate issue.
But it's not a separate issue. That is the issue. He's not fining me for any missing funding or any misappropriating of funds.
The second fine is for an incorrect reporting.
Which we did report. We did give it to them. I'm trying to explain to you.
After the election was over.
No. He asked for it again now. I am telling you that on September the 19th, go look through the emails and go on October the 4th. We had proper disclosures. Their problem is that they were missing a bank statement. That's why
been resolved.
It's not resolved because if you look at the...
You're not paying attention.
No, Mr. Davis, attached to the filing, there's something called the disclosure statement. On that disclosure statement, you have to copy everything over. Nothing was different now than I submitted in September, October, and in January of 2016. 2018.
Both violations relate to the fact that the bank statements you submitted did not match to the reports you filed. In one case, in connection with expenditures, in one connection, in connection with receipts. It does not involve
and that's why we have audits, Mr. Davis. And that's why on January the 15th and January the 16th, we were on with e-filings, with Zoe Coyle, and we sent again any request, and we attached the finding of the disclosure statements 13 through 16 for Harold Tischler it was sent to her 4 different attachments on January 15th. and then on January, again, they were copied on it, and January the 16th, again, to the e-filings, where she asked us to send it. So we were in compliance, and then we sent it. So again, he's saying that I didn't report timely. I did report timely because whatever they said they were missing or we did wrong, we sent back. So you're fining me for something that they did, had no copies of.
You're missing the point, or we're missing the point.
At the end of the day, I did everything right. I did everything right in a small campaign. Nothing was done wrong. I have no idea why I'm even sitting here. You want to get, like the guy before, you want to get a fine for me, $500? My people donate much more to the city, and we help do much more volunteer work. You're taking $1,100 from me for what? For not reporting in an untimely manner a year later.
Now, look, I don't think we're going to get through, but I'll try one more time.
Yeah.
You said that's what we have audits for. Actually, that's not correct. So there are certain disclosure requirements during the campaign whose purpose is to inform the public as to how much in the way of receipts and expenditures a campaign is incurring as it's going on.
Mr. Schaefer, I don't want to waste your time. I'm 55 years old.
Let me finish.
I'm a grandfather. I really don't want to waste my life sitting in campaign finance board. What I want to tell you is very simple so you can finish, because I want to go home too. My plain and simple is I did send the stuff. And again, I'm going to repeat it again to you. It was correct. They don't have it complete. I sent it complete. Look at their emails. They were missing a statement. They're missing it. Not because, and I resent.
Let me assure you.
Mr. Schaefer, I resent copies of what I gave them, and I am in compliance.
Okay, we're going to look at the emails. We're going to look at the disclosure statement. I'm going to assure you.
I'm correct.
We're going to do that.
Please.
But I suspect they're going to be beside the point, because you're not understanding what the nature of the penalty is. And since you're not going to let me explain it, I'll just leave it at that.
Mr. Schaefer, you will see that I was in compliance in October of 2017. In January of 2018, they received all the documents. Nothing changed. Nothing was updated. No disclosure statements were fixed. No new bank statements were created. They got everything. What they didn't see was their incompetence, or maybe they didn't put it together, or they lost it. Yes, I'm going to tell you that. And you know many government agencies with the red tape. You guys lose things.
There's no issue.
And I'm telling you there's an issue. I'm a citizen. I'm a citizen and a resident of this town that has a right to say anything he wants. And I'm sitting before you and making a complaint. He got everything on time. We hand-delivered it to him, just like we hand-delivered the last package to him. Once he got the last package, he saw that we were in full compliance. They have no problem with money issues. They're saying they were missing a document back then that messed them up. But at the end of the day, Mr. Schaefer, there's nothing wrong. My compliance, my disclosures were perfect. The email dates of submissions were on time. Any questions we had, we called them many times. This research of you re-going through emails and checking over documentation after this hearing is not correct. Should have been done before he sat down there. He should have brought the emails and paperwork. And he even admits to you that my documentation is all there. I thank you for your time. Okay. I am in full compliance. And that's it. Okay. I request and I respectfully request no fine whatsoever.
Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We will go into deliberations. Thank you.
I didn't know.
I'm still confused about this first.
I didn't mean to be disrespectful.
Yeah, it's all right. You're entitled to make seem to have lost much of our audience.
I think because I think people they left, and so.
Okay. All right. So we're back in session, and here's what we've decided, or here's what I'm proposing, subject to the vote that we're about to take. So first, in the matter of Barry Grodenchik, here are the alleged violations and the board's proposed penalties. One, failing to provide bank and merchant account statements, $500. Two, failing to demonstrate compliance with cash receipts reporting and documentation requests, $82. Three, failing to demonstrate compliance with subcontractor reporting and documentation requirements, $100. Four, accepting contributions from unregistered political committees, $125. Five, failing to demonstrate that spending was in furtherance of the campaign, $250. Six, making impermissible post-election expenditures, $250. Seven, failing to respond to the initial documentation request, $2,500, for a total penalties of $3,807, plus a recommended public funds repayment of what's ever in the bank account. I think that's at the moment a moving target. So that is the proposal with respect to Councilmember Grodenchik. I'll move the approval. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Second matter, candidate Harold Tischler. We propose the following violations and penalties. One, failing to report transactions, $638. Two, failing to demonstrate compliance with the reporting requirements for receipts, $500, for a total of $1,138. I'll move the approval of those penalties. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Next item in our agenda is to ratify the special election public funds payments, which Amy is now going to state for the record.
The staff has made public funds payments in the February 21st special election for public advocate. The board ratified the previous payments. What we're asking the board to ratify is the public funds payments that were made on February 20. February 18th. I'm sorry. Okay, yes. And these are the payments that we're recommending. It's February. The election was on February 26th. It was February 21st payment to Michael Blake, $97,525. Dawn Smalls, $184,110. To Jamani Williams, $372,873. To Raphael Espinal, $113,749. To Ronald Kim, $52,825. To Daniel O'Donnell, $124,625. To Eric Ulrich, $159,174. To Nomiki Konst, $512,568. To Melissa Mark Riverito, $408,359. To Yadanis Rodriguez, $510,560. To Benjamin Yee, $542,680.
Okay, I'll move the ratification of those payments. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstention? The motion carries. There's an item on our agenda that we're going to put off to a later time concerning the proposed rules. And at this time, I'll move to go into executive session, and since we have no action items in executive session, to adjourn following the executive session. Is there a second for that motion? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.